Hello, and welcome to this week's exciting edition of Victory Never Sleeps. My co-host, Witan Svan, is on his way. Um, some sort of issues are detaining him, but he says he's headed this way. Uh, Today's piece that we're going to cover is very seldom talked about and takes a little bit of work. So I suppose a good thing to load up front so everybody has maximal time. As always, we're going with Bellows Translations, and we're reading off of veluspau.org, I believe.
Yes, but it is not the Bellows translation. It is Thorpe. There is no Bellows.
Okay. We're in that. We're in that section. All right. So I guess a thing. So I'll figure out so we'll be accurate on all of these. I don't know if this one is an outlier or if the next section of Heroic Lays is going to also be a different translation, but I'll get it figured out. I say that to say this one's kind of obscure. It's one of the reasons I don't think that Bellows did the translation on it. It's seldom talked about, and it takes a little bit of work. It is the Sólarljóð, which is like the songs of the sun. It's a whole lot of Jesus stuff in there because of the time period, but it's really displaying a lot of the inner workings of the mind of our folk at that time. It talks about a lot of points of reference that our folk were, that were relevant to our folks' mindset at the time and things they were going through, points of familiarity. It does have value, but it's a little bit less self-evident. You got to do a little bit more digging to get the Asatru value out of this conversion era, very, very Christian lay in our Edda. So he has appeared. Svan is with us now, but yeah, please feel free to follow along. Also, as always, if you find it in whatever other source you find it, other translations are welcome and may add a little bit different dimension. We're starting off the show. GW Farnsworth bought us 5 coffees as usual and very much appreciated. It's a $25 donation. Thank you so much for that and for your consistent generosity. We're running numbers to let everybody kind of know where we are at on our Hoff. So some of you may not know, we bought in August of now I'm mathing. Anyways, we got Njord's Hoff. We're working on it. It was our most expensive Hoff by far, which is fine. It's a really good value. We got good things, but we're getting better at being able to afford nice things for our gods. And Njord's Hoff is an example of that. But it incurred a little bit of debt. You guys have been amazing in being able to help us pay off that debt. We are 2 years and 6 months, I think, into the pay down period, and we're already I'm looking at that percentage, 75 point something percent done. 75.9. So that's fantastic. It's amazing progress. Anybody that's been watching, you've seen this in the last few months make tremendous progress, which is always a really special thing. So yeah, we've got it whittled down now to where we owe 58,900, and I have conflicting numbers, so I'm not sure which to go with. Is 925 or 975, Nick?
It would be the 75. I just typed it wrong in our chat.
All right. So what that looks like, and I try to break it down in these numbers because I think it's valuable to do so. Sorry, I had to quick math. So if everybody right now if everybody who is an AFA member right now donated $79, we'd have that HOF paid off instantly. So that's just something to keep in mind. That is a lot of progress in a short amount of time, and I appreciate your guys' continued generosity. Thank you very much to everyone who's donated at any part of this process. Also, thank you to those who are considering and decide to donate. If you're interested and you're listening to this at a later time, the donate link is at runestone.org. So please check that out. I think it's always a good thing to mention we're streamlining our process. This will be released tomorrow as maybe even super late tonight. We will see. But very quickly, within 24 hours, this should be uploaded as a podcast, and you guys will be able to listen to it. If that's how you consume this, you're always welcome to join us live. If you have questions during the show, please ask them. If they're relevant to what we're talking about, we'll jump right into them. If we're trying to take a break, we'll jump right into them. If not, we will definitely get to them by the end of the program. But in case you're listening to this down the road and a question comes to you, if you send it to vns@runestone.org, we will get it in the queue for next week. And we appreciate all your questions. It's a very audience interaction driven program. So please keep those coming. With that, our events. So coming up very soon, we have the national event that is showcased at Njordshof, the Hof we were just speaking of. That's in White Springs, Florida. And that's going to be February 21st through the 23rd, Charming of the Plow. So please join us for that if you're able. My family and I will be there. Many of our leadership will be there. A lot of folks from, all around that district, as well as some from outside. So we would love to meet you guys if you can make it. Once again, that's in White Springs, Florida. It's a neat spot. It's a beautiful thing. We'd love to show it off to you guys. Also coming up the following month in March, we have Ostara at Thorshof. Thorshof is in Linden, North Carolina. That's going to be March 21st through the 23rd. It's a really special event. It's an amazing place with some really fantastic folks. I am looking forward to being at that event, and I hope to see all of you that I can there. If you are interested, please contact your local folk builder. We get y'all set up. But yeah, we'd love to see you guys at either or both of those events. And with that, Svan, do you have any kind of preparation people need to do mentally or otherwise for tonight's subject? Anything people need to know?
Keep in mind Beowulf. The construction of this poem is very similar, with the admixture of Christianity kind of peppered in. That's about it. It's disjointed. It's odd. And like you had said, there are certain poems we're going to go over that may seem to be more relevant than others, and that we're trying to glean, the nuggets out of it. We're knocking off the dross and the slag for the real strong stuff, but that is present here. I mean, even the first couple stanzas seem very disjointed from the rest of the poem.
And one of the things that I think, and I know we've mentioned it all right, so kind of as you guys are familiar with the program, you know that we collectively, and me in specific, I tend to go off on these little rabbit trails on things because some of that's just kind of how my brain works. But something that I think is important to keep in mind, and if you've heard it already, forgive me for repeating it, we have a lot of audience that may be the first time. Our lore is really special in a lot of ways, and kind of for perspective on our lore, we first started out when folks like Svan and myself first came home to Asatru. There was this old don't know, cheesy. I'll
Adage.
strip religion of homework with homework.
Yeah.
Any religion you take seriously is the religion with homework. But there was this period, and that was during a period where there was a whole lot of self-discovery, but self-discovery of a folk, self-discovery of a religion. There was a lot of learning that went on, and a lot of still establishing those early footholds in things. And when you start out, a lot of our material seems very different. Maybe it's something you've never heard of before, something that seems really obscure. You get this stack of books and you're like, wow, there's this endless amount of research you can do. You'd be surprised how quickly you run out of endless, and we've all kind of read the same things. But you know, I have the privilege of going through this lore again on this program with you guys and with my colleagues, first among them, Witan Svan here. And I can say completely honestly, and this is stuff that I have been back over a lot of different times, but usually I'm digging for something specific when I go back into it a lot. Looking at it completely fresh and going on over it in all the details, you see really different things. And our lore is so very deep and layered. When you are a young man and you first get into this, the things that stand out to you, the things that strike a chord, the things that resonate are different, or do so in a different way, or both, than when you approach them at a different stage in your life. You know, reading this is, you know, somebody in his early 20s trying to make his way in the world, as a single young man trying to become someone, is really different than reading it as a husband, as a father, as a leader, and as a Gothi. And that's a really cool thing about it. And there's also stuff with, the lore that's just going to hit you in the face as big, bold color things that stand out, that are clearly understood why they're important. But the more you go through it at a leisurely pace, where you're sipping it instead of shooting it, you appreciate it in a really different way. There's nuance. There's complexity. We have big stories of the gods and the big tales that we all hear and that we repeat. But things like this give you a glimpse into the psychology and the mindset of the people living during that time frame. Now, we're not ancient Vikings during the conversion period. That's not where we are. But to understand our lore as it is presented in the age that we have that written down, the more we understand where people are coming from when they say the things that they say, the better we're able to apply that and translate that into terms and situations we face in our own lives. So it's cool as a historical interest. It's cool as a literary interest. It's great for all those things. And if that's why you're with us, then more power to you. That's great. But religiously speaking, there's these little things and these little nuggets that are going to be very valuable to some people and maybe not so much to others. So I appreciate you guys joining us on this journey that we're taking tonight. If you go ahead and get where we are at, find your spot, and Swan will dive in when he is ready.
Yeah, I was going to say a little bit. One, I think this is a harsh reality poem. Most likely, Simander the Wise was tasked with writing it down. But the person who composed the poem is still unknown. The style is very, very old. So it is done in like the Fornidislag style, the old way. And I think that's what probably drew the attraction. The other thing is it was probably a really new poem to Snorri and Simander at the time, but was held in the old style. So this is the best thing that they could probably ask for. I think it's worth remembering that all of our poems that are written down come from stories. And I think a lot of people forget that. And that these stories were shaved and constructed in such a way that they would be good poems based on poetic rules. So when I tell stories of the gods and things like that, it's not always in a poetic format, and it's not always, held in strictness. So Snorri and Sæmundur were at a time 150 years after the conversion of Iceland, and it's a tumultuous time in which cultures are clashing. There are churches that are showing up. People are kind of, again, forced to go, not in the sense that they're held at spear point before they go, but that it's noticed when they don't show up. And, at first it's like, yes, you can honor the Aesir at different times, but you go and you honor the Christ God of Rome or the Christ God of Jerusalem on Sunday. And if you don't show up, it starts to get noticed. And then the clergy of these churches start to weave within the communities certain things. And then, of course, they're focusing in on the children, perhaps even the women and the young daughters, and trying to, impress upon them the importance of saving their soul from Gehenna, or, what they call hell by this point. So there's a lot to that. This is, in essence, a Christian poem from a father to a son, but there are marks of or references to a time before. So this poem really is that nexus point in the day rune, if you will. It's the X point, and the X point is sometimes contemptuous, sometimes mysterious, sometimes confusing, convoluted, and before moving into the new era of things. And I think that this is an example of it, is that they're tearing down the spiritual house of a people that have been around for thousands of years, and is now replacing it with the bureaucratic church. And it would be like, oh, you can't say it's a bureaucratic church or what have you, but I would like to note that the Icelanders immediately kicked out the Catholic Church the moment that the Lutheran Reformation happened, because they were very tired of having to kind of bow to Rome or bow to the whims of not so much a faraway land, because travel wasn't a big problem. Problem was a different culture, a different people. And not only that, these people had been inundated with a culture of other people that were not folk. So there was a great degree of separation there. And I think Martin Luther allowed this foreignness to be kind of contained a little bit more into the realm of the Teutonic or the Germanic mindset. So don't be surprised when we start this. I mean, it reads like Christian literature, but it does, again, reference back. And it'll give us a chance to talk about, I know that Alzirago and me both come from deeply Christian backgrounds. I didn't, really come home until I was 12, 13, 14, somewhere in that area, in the early 90s. And, before that, I was, coming to America and exploring their religious landscape. Lutheranism was what my mother, kind of pointed me in the direction of. And then there was, Catholic and Presbyterian. churches that were also available to me through friends. So I would go to all of them to look and kind of find the answer to this deep feeling I had in me that there was something. And then when those did not fulfill that desire, it was actually my mother. So it was like the answer was in my house all along, that led me towards understanding that my ancestors had a religion before Christianity, which I did not know. And then once I found out, it led me down this path of understanding that there was a religion practiced by my ancestors for many, 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 many years before Christianity. And it was just kind of taught that there wasn't, that there was just some sort of gray void before. So, okay, let's see. Also, I'll be doing the Thorpe translation for this one, which I think is the same for the voluspow.org. I don't know if
Yes,
yeah, okay, gotcha. Yeah, just to let everybody know, this is the Thorpe translation. I don't believe Bellows did this one.
We got to that one. You were tardy. It caught me on this one. The last one I did that to you. I was able to actually, Svan.
Sorry.
But yeah, I didn't see it in the intro of this one. But yeah, that's kind of a testament to its obscurity. And I think a lot of the audience will be completely unfamiliar with it.
Well, and one thing they might notice about Thorpe is his straightforwardness, which I really like. If you want to kind of cut through the poetic din, if Bellows is and Hollander and their kind of way of writing is too, I've heard people say biblical because of the King James Bible. Read Thorpe. Thorpe cuts straight to the bone, and his writing style is very flat. And oftentimes his translations are comically direct or just flatly written out. So it's kind of good to keep Thorpe on the sidelines when you want to cut through the poetics, if you will. So we start off with 1. Of life and property, a fierce freebooter despoiled mankind. Over the ways beset by him might no one living pass. So many bodies and many people have I killed, much property have I taken, going a Viking. Again, the best translation, I think, to Viking. And, our scholars of the past understood it to be a job or a verb is freebooting. Of course, for anybody that needs to know, the German word Butte, B-U-T-T-E, means treasure. So it survives in our language with freebooter, someone who takes the treasure without giving in kind. So this fierce freebooting despoiled mankind. Over the ways beset by him might no one living pass. So 1, despoiled shows that the essence of the elder mindset, especially at that time, was that there was no kind of crime in going out, taking and adding to your own. Your inner guard gets enriched. Your outer guard is free game. And this again applies the mindset of inner guard, outer guard, and it has changed over time. And all religions and all moral systems that are built around them do have ones that are subjective. And I think this is one of them. But for our ancestors, the idea was if they could take, especially from those who were not defending their wealth and riches, to build up their own was good.
Well, and everything is about everything is about context. And I see people try to rationalize or make excuses, but we're not. I've warned against this a lot, holding ancient people accountable to 2025 understandings of things is really different. So the world is largely settled. There's very little wilderness. There's very little, untouched by civilization peoples of the world. There's a couple cannibal tribes hidden in the jungle or hidden on an island somewhere. But in general, modern nation states have divided the world, and there's borders, there's political concerns, there's things, or there's integrated societies. That's not the world that our ancestors, the ones that we're reading about tonight, occupy. There's a lot of unaffiliated random things out there. There's a lot of, it's not nearly that clear. But the other thing about first world problems, we complain about, man, if your AC goes out, like it's the end of the world. Or, if you find out that, I don't know, you want to go get Indian food, but those people like to take a nap at like between 1 and 2 in the afternoon, and you can't get your Indian food that day in the middle of, Reno, Nevada, you're upset.
I was going to say, that sounds oddly personal.
No, it's time for sleeping. Like if I was in Calcutta, then fine. But no, we don't sleep at 1 o'clock here. We feed Matt naan and beef korma.
Wait a minute. Wait, flag on the play. You eat Indian food? Oh,
I do. I love Indian food.
No, I remember us having that conversation where
curry
must imagine that.
The best Indian food, and this is a sad irony, you got to find the like Pakistanis or the like Indians that aren't Hindu or whatever. Beef is amazing in Indian food. Everything that you eat with chicken in Indian food is better if it is beef. But I digress. Significantly. What I was going to say is we have all these really silly problems, or, we're not getting good internet connectivity to watch whatever streaming show at our fingertips we want to watch. I too am vexed when I cannot do those things. But our ancestors were in a time where if you're not, especially in Scandinavia, if you're not on top of it, lots of our people, maybe you're not eating. Maybe you lose the baby because you're not consuming enough nutrients to feed them or to produce enough milk to feed the child. If you're not storing things up, your family goes hungry. If you are not able to insulate yourself against the cold, you're freezing to death. There's a lot of realities. So it seems harsh in this day and age to see it this way because we are surrounded by comfort and safety nets. But if my people that look like me, that are related to me, that I know that are my folk, are suffering, and guys over on this other island or this other piece of land that are not my people, that I don't know, that do other things, have stuff that I need or want, if one of us is going to make it through the winter, I'm going to do my damnedest to make sure it's me and mine. And that's the reality. A lot of these people, that is the impetus. Now, I don't want to sugarcoat it. Yes, when you realize, man, I can get rich doing this. I can farm and maybe have some goats, and I can eat some sheep testicles and some goat head. Or I can get casks of wine and exotic spices and delicious things from, these fortified places, especially in a warrior culture. If I can take it and they can't defend it, then cool. And that's, in our head, we may not see the connection, but Vikings are pirates. Like, they are yarg. They are pirates. They are pirates in every sense of that word is what the term means. But just like pirates, if we take a better look at, Some of them have notes of marque, and they're actually, some kind of semi-affiliated guerrilla navy for a country that helps. So some of these Viking raids are done with the blessing of princes or of kings against nations and people that are not their allies. There's a lot of gray area in between there, but some of these are just going out for plunder and seeing what you can get out of it. Some of them are trading expeditions that happen to, we will also steal some stuff. Some of them are, there's a wide variety, but in Scandinavia at that time period, that was a major source of establishing yourself and your family with some degree of prominence, is literally going and winning it with axe and sword and spear. It was a dangerous life, and you saw a lot of that in December when we went over Egil Saga. So there we are.
So as soon as we jumped in the first stanza, we're like, boom. But that's the beauty of these. It's a shorter poem, and having that dialogue, I think, gets a chance for people to get kind of our opinions on these things, and also to, ask those questions. So in 2, he says, alone he ate most frequently. No one invited he to his repast, until weary and with failing strength, a wandering guest came from the way. 3, in need of drink that way-worn man, and hungry feigned to be, with trembling heart he seemed to trust him who had been so evil-minded. So, again, feigning hunger, but yet still he trusts. Meat and drink in 4, to the weary one he gave, all with upright heart. On God, he thought, the traveler's wants supplied, for he felt he was an evil doer. So when I made kind of an emphasis on that, because I know the kind of modern talk with like the young Gen Z or Gen Alpha, or I don't know which one it is, about the whole on God comment, but I just found it quite funny. But again, there's this moment here now where a guest is being brought in and held according to really the ancient customs of hospitality. And there is apprehension because he is a Viking, he is a freebooter. Up stood the guest, he evil meditated. He had not been kindly treated. His sin within him swelled. He, while sleeping, murdered his weary, cautious host. So now we see the weariness and just basically one of the big caveats of Christianity coming into the Nordic lands was the emphasis of sin. And so now they're establishing, and again, when this poem is recited, is kind of creating new moral parameters within society. The God of heaven, he prayed for help. When being struck, he woke. But he was doomed, the sins of him on himself to take, whom sackless he had slain. Sorry, I got confused. The Viking is being attacked in his sleep. So kind of like his sins or his karma, I guess is kind of what they're ultimately saying, but not cumulative karma, like as how like modern people think of it, where it just like comes back. Holy angels came from heaven above and took to them his soul. In a life of purity it shall ever live. with the Almighty God. So in this first 7, I think it's worth noting that there are some interesting things translationally. One, they don't capitalize God when they're referring to Yahweh. You also notice that like there are words that are part of the Germanic lexicon and then others that aren't. So for instance, hymna, Guð, heavenly God, and then helgir englar, and englar being angel. Angel is a Greek word, Latin word, or Greek originally, that was taken by the Jews of the early church and utilized in reference to their gods. They have what they were called Molochs, not Moloch, but Moloch, meaning messenger. So we can see that kind of transference there. And then it almost kind of shifts.
Cha, ja, cha, ja.
I'm getting.
Okay, we're getting Nick. Is your mic on?
No.
Apparently it was.
So, and I see I keep getting notifications too. I'm trying to figure out where everything is so I can silence it all. Okay, 1 second there. There we go. So now it switches over. Riches and health no one may command, though all go smoothly with him. To many that befalls which they least expect, no one may command his tranquil. And then it breaks off. And this again because the writing of this is not complete, as in it didn't survive very well. Unnr and Sævaldi never imagined that happiness would fall from them, yet naked they became, and all bereft like wolves, and like wolves ran to the forest. The force of pleasure has many a one bewailed. Cares are often caused by women. Pernicious they become, although the mighty God them pure created. So this point is like a shifting into the afterlife. And one of the key factors that Christians brought into the Asatru world, as we will just say it for ease, is, oh, you can't take it with you. You can't take the money with you. I think this was a huge tactic towards their ability to go towards tithing, is that they kind of disassociated wealth with personage, like personage, or personness, I guess is the best word. They were having a problem. Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, so a couple of things, and while we're on this, I think it is very politically charged to say that Christianity equals communism, but it kind of does. And it does in a lot of ways in the idea of social leveling. So in the Sermon on the Mount, it's basically blessed are the losers, as opposed to in any European pagan society of the time, specifically in Asatru. No, blessed are the heroes. Blessed are the winners. But the population that was first converting to Christianity wasn't the success, even in a completely Jewish Middle Eastern context. It wasn't the successful Jews. It wasn't the priests. It wasn't the folks that were having success in their life. It was the poor, the downtrodden, the slaves, the widows and orphans, and people who were struggling. And the idea that the least will be made greatest, the idea that it takes the underdog, and you're saved by faith alone and not by works, that none might boast. So the idea is you get made, you get enriched and elevated because Jehovah decides to bless you with good things when he gives you a reward in the afterlife. And those people that had the audacity to be successful in life, well, he's going to knock them down a peg and they don't get to take it with them. And it's very contrary to our lore, but something to think about that I think is interesting. So while we're on the money thing, but I do want to mention something else. But while we're on that, our people get a silly reaction to money, and I think that we inherit that from some of the culture that brought people to Asatru. And a lot of that, as I've said before, is trying to contrast it with Christianity. Like, oh, we see this corruption in the Christian church of these pastors that are in some ways that are obvious and particularly offensive to us, like scamming people out of money. And we get this idea in our head that that's bad and money's bad, and whatever silliness that we have is a reaction to something negative. One thing that was interesting to me earlier this year when I was reading The Elder Gods by Stephen Pollington, what was it? Bishop Ophius in England was getting really grumpy and contrasting it because the Christians in England weren't tithing, and they were being shown up because the Asatru were, competing to be the first guy to bring awesome sacrifices and goods to the temple and to pay their Hoftoller, while the Christians were, being miserly and not wanting to do that. So there's not this idea that Christians were, trying to enforce this tithe, and that the Asatru didn't make religious offerings in terms of goods, money, and service, because they absolutely did. There's a lot of stuff that we don't know by omission, but the existence of a priesthood of Hofs and of things, we see glimpses of a lot. And what we do, and it's an ancient term, is Hoftoller. That's what supported the Gothar and the Hofs. And that was a thing. And it was interesting because we see it so rarely, but to see Ophius like, these Asatru with their generous offerings to their gods, and our Christians can't, be bothered to do their part. So I don't think that hostility towards money, I think that's anachronistically laid towards the past. And I don't think that's how it was at all. But also things about the afterlife. When we hear Christian, very often we think of Latin Catholicism, and we don't realize that early Greek, early Jewish Christianity was very, very different. It talks about how these, beautiful angels come and like immediately take the soul of the dead up to heaven, up to their paradise. That's not a Bible thing. That's like with Ezekiel, with Jesus, with a very few select people, they get a straight route to, oh, you die or don't, and we'll just bring you up. The big guy's calling you up. That's not what most of that was. Most of it was dead. The idea of the dead having an afterlife in heaven is a very late addition to biblical Christianity. You see that in terms of like post-apocalypse in Revelation, but you don't see that in the Jewish lore. That's not their tradition. The idea of you being elevated up to heaven and being brought up by like women, because angels in the medieval conception are these like beautiful women taking you up to heaven with their wings and whatever. That is much, much more similar to the idea of the Valkyrie than it is to, you know, the strange, like, beholder looking monsters manual things that are the Jewish conception of angels. So you see Christianity starting to take the medieval shape that we're used to during this time of and I say this time of conversion. Conversion's been going on for probably 700 years, 800 years at this point. But you see the transition from the imagery and the appeal to the Semitic mind to the imagery and the appeal to our Aryan mind, and specifically the Nordic mind at this point. And it's a very different picture. And I think that it's telling and interesting. In the ancient world, before communication was so instant, your Christianity in Scandinavia is very, very different than the Christianity at Rome, and it's worlds different than the Christianity in like Constantinople and Antioch, in the Holy Land, in Ethiopia. You have these in like Coptic Christians in Egypt. You have these different sects of Christianity at the time that look very, very different because of these things. Now, yes, the European overlay of Christianity became the predominant one as our folk basically conquered the known world and conquered the ability to spread information and to culturally dominate. But when you're judging Christianity in order to do it fairly, and this is what I am very, very thankful to the Jehovah's Witnesses for, in their interpretation of Christianity versus the world, as they would say, but versus paganism, they were very honest brokers. Their Christianity is biblical Christianity, and it's not fun, and it's not cool looking, and it's not any of those things. To me, perhaps if I was a Middle Eastern Hebrew gentleman, I would see it differently, but I'm not. And it made really clear kind of what that probably looked like at the time. And so I think in order to judge fairly, as opposed to just reacting to what we think is Christianity, if we're going to try to make sure to react against it, we should react against like actual Christianity and not the various transmorphing that their ideology took in an appeal to our folk soul. A lot of the things, and I see people, and I think this is fair, a lot of people are rightly moved by a lot of religious imagery that's been presented as Christian to them, because so many of the reference points in it are beautiful. They're beautiful because they're not Christian.
Right.
They're all of the cool stuff. Now, maybe it's not practiced correctly in that way, but the imagery, the root, the meme, if you will, of it comes from our folk soul. And I say that everybody's going to have different tastes of the stuff that you like, but a lot of the things I find our folk are very impressed by when they are impressed by Christianity are things that are very unchristian in a literal sense.
I noticed in the chat, American Farmer had made mention about these, the 30-point reforms to Christianity. I think it's worth noting, though, if you go down that pathway, it's best to context. Rosenberg was using the Gnostic church of the Marcionites, and the Marcionites, their entire structure was built on completely removing the Old Testament. And the problem with modern Christians, or at least Christianity in general, is that the establishment of a Messiah, which is not Aryan at all in any way, shape, or form, is established in the Old Testament. So removing that became problematic. And that's why that church was kind of listed in the Gnostic churches, and was eventually burned out. But I mean, I understand, what you're saying, but it's worth, remembering that there's that heavy caveat that if Christianity was reformed in that direction, it would in essence be removing the spirit of what it entirely is. And it's a Semitic religion. I often say over and over again, when I talk to, very pro-European guys who are Christian online, that it is a subsect of Judaism. It is pseudo-Judaic. And that goes all the way down to the point of a Messiah. And so that was the one problem that I think Rosenberg and a lot of other people that were looking at the reformations of Christianity and possibilities of where it could go. Even Uphilos, who was the Christian Gnostic who tried to convert the Goths, and their view that the rabbi, Yeshua, was not the same as Yahweh, but a creation of. And again, there was all these different Gnostic churches. So I mean, even the Simonites, who Jesus's brother, and that whole thing is kind of argued, started a church in Egypt. The Gnostic rabbit hole to go down is pretty interesting.
That's kind of a key theme that we'll run into in a lot of this. Yes, if you're trying to make a Christianity that's awesome for our people, then yes, as a fact, the less Christian you make it, the better it will be. But this is and I'm not American Farmer, I'm not aiming this at you. This is a really good comment, and I'm glad that you made it. When I answer some of these things, sometimes they feel like they're aimed at the poster, and they're not. They're aimed at the people listening, that I see a point of similarity in the question or in the comment. A lot of people, and I've mentioned this a lot on recent shows, weren't raised religiously. Certainly our European audience, it's very doubtful they were raised with regular church attendance and regular religious expression in their upbringing. And we're seeing that, like in my day, most Americans, you're kind of if your family wasn't religious, you're maybe one step removed from it. Your best friend, your neighbor was. So, and that's different parts of the country you might find yourself in. But it's worth noting. So we get folks that approach religion from a point of atheism, as opposed to from a position of being a person of faith. And the initial kind of forays and thought processes are kind of different. A lot of young people, especially young men on the internet and whatever, that wake up to some of these things, they try to strategically plan or craft religion because they realize it's important and it should happen and it should be a thing, but they're not tied to it as being a reality. It's like you're picking and choosing something on a video game to customize your team. Yeah. And it's not that. Religion is about truth. Yes, we could make up whatever we want to make this cool. If I wanted to maximize growth or maximize this or that or the other, I could just make up stuff. But that's not religion. It's not genuine. And there's liars and fraudsters that would do that. We're very careful not to do this. The stuff that we're presenting, we believe to be, well, first, the stuff that we're presenting is true. The particulars of it, we genuinely believe to be true, or our closest understanding of that truth. And it's either real or it's not. Like, yeah, you can twist around Christianity to make it better, but that doesn't mean our people, it's not noble for our people to give our devotion to a Semitic God that we don't believe is good or ours or the right way to go. It is right and noble for our people to embrace our gods and rebuild our relationship with them in that pursuit of things we know to be true. So the machinations, it's very uncomfortable to jettison something that has had put a layer of paint, put a lens over the glories of Western civilization for the last 1,000 years. I completely understand that. So we want to kind of have our cake and eat it too. And like, no, we could still have Christianity because look at all these amazing, pieces of music, these beautiful cathedrals, the works of art, this cultural expansion, all of this stuff. We don't want to get rid of all that. So you try so hard to like shave the pieces so you can make the square peg go into the round hole. Ultimately, it's the noble thing and it's the courageous thing to say, no, this is wrong. We're going to go a different way. We're going to appreciate the beautiful things about our past and what got us here, but we're going to break with the things that are bad and wholeheartedly embrace the thing that's new. You don't try to make your ex look like the girl that you want to be with. Like, you don't like try to like, here, you should put on a costume like this chick that I'm supposed to be with over here so that I can have the comfort of what I'm used to. That's disingenuous to both parties, and it's just kind of the wrong thing to do, and you're never going to get what you're actually trying to do. It's just kind of it's setting yourself up for failure, and it's you live with the incongruence of it when you're left alone by yourself and it's not true.
I was looking up something. So here's an interesting thing. And I don't know at what point in Christian history they may have felt about this, but one of the interesting points about this poem is one, the first 7 stanzas are in essence about kind of anonymous or unknown people, because then it switches after 8 and there is no connection between the sleeping guest that is overtaken by the ravaging Viking, or sorry, sleeping host overtaken by the Viking guest. There's that actually doesn't correlate into the other parts of the poem. So in essence, it's kind of highlighting sin. But the overarching thing is that this is a poem about a father who is deceased and is passing on this knowledge to his son, how to maintain salvation. And I don't know if this is a newer thing, but I remember in Christian teachings growing up was that anything outside of God was ungodly, the devil, demons, whatever. But that even to conversing with the dead, that each individual soul is concerned with gaining access into Shamnayim, or heaven as they translated it to, and getting closer to Yahweh. And it doesn't matter if you're good or not, unless you follow precepts or maintain the covenant or accept the rabbi as your Messiah, you don't get in. So I find that very interesting, because the whole premise of the poem is more akin to our way, in which the stories of going and finding a keyhole into the realm of the ancestors beyond the veil, and having them glean some wisdom towards us, is what this poem ultimately is about.
I want to say one more thing before we get back into it on Promethean. Josh, your point about Catholicism. This is I don't know, to some people an unpopular opinion, but it's my sincere belief. I think that people look back, and one of the things that they don't like is the broken line of tradition between the Asatru of our ancestors, and then there's this big gap when there's this, man, what would that look like today? What's the closest point of reference that we have? And a lot of people go to Hinduism to think that that's the closest thing to what a evolution of Asatru would have been with the advancements of time. And I don't think that's the case. If we look around for religious tradition of what's most similar to original Asatru, I think that medieval Catholicism, like pre-Vatican II Catholicism, is a much closer evolution of what that would look like than Hinduism. Yes, I realize that a lot of Hindu tradition and their concept of the gods in a lot of ways goes back to very, very ancient Aryan roots. But so much of what they do is completely and totally foreign. Roman Catholicism jettisoned so much of the Middle Easternness of what they're doing and was built so heavily on the ability to build on cultural touchstones of our ancestors that is a much closer approximation in a lot of ways. And I know that makes some folks uncomfortable, but I think that there's a great deal of truth in it.
Also, Hammer-wise, I wanted to say Mithra slaying the bull, not, I think, the first one on the list. I would even argue that those connections of Mithras to Persia, but the Lord Thor slaying Jormungandr, or Sigurd slaying Fafnir, those would be far more close in the mind in relation to Saint Michael slaying the dragon than I'm sure Mithras is there, but he had more of a Mediterranean influence. You know, when you see that in England, when you see that in Germany and North, more likely the connection was to Lord Thor or to Sigurd than Mithras. But I'm not saying that it doesn't have its place, but I certainly don't think it's the first on the list. And I think that in this day and age, we get a lot of conversation and people will throw like Mithras up there because of his uniqueness and kind of his ground zero with his church and the Christian church kind of coming at the same time. But we got to talk about the imagery and all of that stuff that our ancestors really keyed in on when they saw like Saint Michael slaying the dragon. The stories of their people were, I think, more ground zero to them than perhaps the obscure religion of Mithras in Rome that didn't survive like Christianity did, especially after Constantine. You know, because we have it so firmly. Or the Slavs with Velez and Perun, Velez coming up as the serpent and Perun striking him down, or Hercules fighting the Hydra. There's just so many Aryan examples of the warrior fighting the serpent. I just wanted to point that out. So we see it kind of shift, and there might be some connection to it. Some people have thought that the two people that are named in these stanzas are the two people in the first 7 stanzas. And I was looking up something as well, because the name Unr, I don't know if it can be used in both genders in Icelandic. I don't know if the spelling makes it different, but my grandmother's name was Unr. So I don't know actually about the Old Norse name and whether or not it was specific to a gender. And I always wondered about that. I asked my mother, is her name Una? And she said, no, it's Unr, Holmfríðarsdóttir. So, no confusion. But in this case, I don't know. And again, a lot of names can hop over. Like, my sister's name is Svana. So Svana and Svanur. And then, Karl or Kar and Kara. Those are the gender specific sides, but they're considered kind of the same name. So here they're establishing again that you can't take wealth with you, that there is great sin, even though I would argue there's great dishonor in slaying your host. The ultimate part of that, I think, is that they're trying to say that going a Viking is a sinful trade. So they're laying out these kind of tutelage of moral systems to backdrop on sin, which is another new concept coming into the Nordic age after the year 1000. And it says Unr and Sævaldi, which means sea strength, never imagined that happiness would fall from them, yet naked they became, and all bereft, and like wolves ran to the forest. So they're filled with fear, and now they're stripped of their being. This is again isolation tactics that Christianity uses. You are now stripped of everything you are, and now Yahweh is going to go over all the bad stuff you did, and there's no way you can escape it unless you do these certain things. And then it says of a force, the force of pleasure has many one bewailed. Cares are often caused by women, pernicious they become, although, and this is again another, although mighty God them pure created. So there is this reference here that of women being purely created, but become these pernicious beings of lust and wantonness. And then it shifts again. So these, the way I read those last 2 stanzas is lovers. I think Unr is a feminine name in the Old Norse context. So
yeah, the R at the end doesn't indicate gender. Well, I was talking about this with somebody the other night. It's really different because we get very used to that in modern language, but in the Old Norse, that's very much not the case.
Yeah, and so it's again, when I was saying this is disjointed, it is a disjointed poem that kind of smatters things together. I think the biggest thing that's worth remembering is that Sæmundur and Snorri did not write these down to keep the religion going. I think that they wrote this down to keep the poetics going.
Yes.
And people forget that. And I don't think that under that premise, they did not change the poems a lot. I think that they did at certain points, but certainly not just free ranged to do it, because
one of the thing about Icelanders, what's cool is that Asatru is so part and parcel of national identity in a lot of ways, that the preservation of the poetics of it holds such a value that it gets preserved along with stuff. Holding on to their cultural traditions. That's why linguistically their language is so much closer to Old Norse than Norwegian, Swedish, or Danish. It's why their naming tradition carries on the patronymic system to this day. All of this stuff, Iceland has such a history of wanting to like celebrate their cultural past, that even not in a religious context, the idea of preserving some of this stuff is incentivized there in a very different way than, you know, we've seen in other nations. There was a time where, you know, every Germanic country was Asatru. There was a time where, you know, every place in Europe was Asatru in the broadest sense of the word, but certainly all of the, you know, Germanic countries were. But you see it so richly preserved in Iceland because of some of these things. So it's really easy to see the glass is half empty, but we are really fortunate that the glass is half full. I've said before, we could practice Asatru in a vacuum. I mean, assuming that the vacuum included us and our gods, but it would look really different. We'd be at a disadvantage, and we would lose so much of the beautiful things that our ancestors laid down for us. So we're very fortunate. As much as it's easy to bemoan the things we don't have, we're extremely fortunate with the things that we do have.
Well, and when we see these two next mentioned, there is, again, the kind of overall lesson connected to them. United were Svalfud and Skarthheathen. Neither might without the other be, until to frenzy they were driven for a woman. So two men, friends, and then a woman drives between them. She was destined for their perdition. On account of that fair maid, neither of them cared for games or joyous days. No other thing could they in memory bear than that bright form, the bright form of her. Sad to them were the gloomy nights, no sweet sleep might they enjoy. But from that anguish rose hate, intense between faithful friends. Hostile deeds are in most places fiercely avenged. To the home they went for that fair woman, and each one found his death. Arrogance should no one entertain. I indeed have seen that those who follow her, for the most part, turn from God. So, first off, yeah, the two friends, and there's a woman in between them. That's pretty fast to say. But the biggest part is home. Again, some of you might be familiar with it with Holmganga or Holmganga, the dueling system of our ancestors at this time, where hazel rods would be placed over a stitched skin, so there was no place for them to go, and if they left it, it was defeat and disgrace. So many a deeds are committed against each other to the point where a duel is made, and then this kind of arrogance, which again, the words that are used in the Old Norse are very interesting. Now I'm like kind of like bookmarking things in my book. And then there's another interesting point too, is the usage of the word fylkja, where it says, I have seen that those who follow her, for the most part, turn from God. And the following part, of course, fylkja, utilized in its more common sense, the following of something. And that is why that soul part is named such, as it follows. But again, it's just more or less restating kind of common things. I think these things were not seen as good amongst our ancestors pre-Christianity. Depending on what was done, that anguish rose, hate intense between faithful friends, because of hostile deeds. Certain deeds bring about these things. But I think ultimately what the Christian is trying to say is lust for a woman, against a friend. But again, I don't think it's well for us to look at it as our ancestors saw that as okay. So this might be redundant in the moral spectrum.
So what's not redundant is celebrating our folks that donate on Victory Never Sleeps. Alsey Coleman Miller the fourth bought us 3 coffees. Hail Odin, hail victory. Hail the giver.
Odin, hail victory.
And we appreciate that a lot, Alsey. Thank you. Jarrett in Virginia donated $80 to Njordshoff. Thank you, Jarrett. We appreciate that. And Russ in Georgia donated $100 to Njordshoff. Thank you so much, Russ. Russ, we appreciate it. And Njord there appreciates as well, I'm sure. Thank you guys. Appreciate you guys being generous.
Yeah, and a lot of folks who have given numerous times, and new folks giving as well. Again, the poem switches to other people. So now you can kind of see how this poem is written. It's snapshots of moral, paradigms. And uniquely, it comes from a Christian who is of a people who still are in certain places, Asatru, and or that the culture is like in this flux state, that middle point. So that's what really makes this poem interesting. So, 16. Rich were both Raudni and Veibowi, and thought only of their well-being. Now they sit and turn their sores to various hearths. They in themselves confided and thought themselves alone to be above all people, but their lot Almighty God was pleased otherwise to appoint. A life of luxury they led in many ways, and had gold for sport. Now they are requited, so that they must walk between frost and fire. So one of the things that I've heard about this, just the description of this, is that it's been interpreted as to be kind of like a Dante's Inferno, in which perhaps the father is speaking of people he has seen in the afterlife, suffering according to the Christian worldview. But ultimately, too, this part here is speaking of exactly what Alzherigodi was talking about, is the feigning of wealth and the idea that wealth is bad. You can't take it with you. God doesn't, what's the term? Mammon will not get you into heaven. And mammon is gold, or I can't remember the translation, but this whole, money means nothing in the end. Your covenant with Yahweh is the only thing that matters, and your money, your riches, doing well for yourself will get you no better spot. And you see this again and again. I used to joke and say that, like, I would write soul, S-O-U-L, socialism, because it does kind of have this concept of keeping the mindset in a certain way. Do they apply that? Certainly not. I think that there are many rich Christians who, again, kind of work their way around this, kind of like actors to their political religion. They end up, paying alms in a way that they can feel forgiven for being so blessed, or being so, what's the word? Not fortunate, but where they have privilege. They have such a privilege. So they end up having to, pay up in order to absolve their privilege. And in this way, it's already here, even in this time frame, in the the year like 1200. So I find that kind of funny as well. So 19, to thy enemies trust thou never, although they speak thee fair. Promise them good, 'tis good to have another's injury as a warning. That's the Havamal. That's where you start to see there's this connection, and the poet clearly inserts this. And again, that's the poetic mechanics of this situation is the reason why Simonder wrote this down. So 19, to thy enemies trust thou never, although they speak thee fair. Promise them good, 'tis good to have another's injury as a warning. That part there at the end is not part of the Havamal, but it's basically speaking of, if you take the slight of something you've done, if you note it, then you know where their boundaries are, where their ego is hurt, or what have you. But again, if your enemy speaks ill, you can speak ill. They set the pace of your situation together. But that's pulled directly from the Havamal. And then it switches back. 20. So it befell sorely the upright, when he placed himself in Vigolf's power, he confidently trusted him, his brother's murderer, but he proved false. Now, I think this one's kind of interesting because it's so specific that this may be connected to maybe a localized poem or powerful people. But again, the emphasis is that you should not make friends with people who are clearly your enemy. Your brother's slayer should not be your friend. The person who speaks against your kinsmen should not be your friend. You should not seek middle ground to be the adjudicator of peace when someone is clearly, started throwing insults or has, broken oaths because of perceived wrongs. You being the middle ground person doesn't make you wise or cool or good. And this one is just so blatantly obvious that I'm wondering if this is like connected to another poem. Or the other thing you could think of is the way things start is often the way things end. If you meet a woman who leaves her husband to be with you, and you're like, it's going to be this way for forever. And then a couple years from now, she leaves you. There's no surprise. If a man steals from his parents and he's your friend, and then one day he has the chance to steal from you, he's probably going to do it. So I think this doesn't necessarily differentiate from Christian or Asatru. It's just laid in there for poetic measure and purpose. 21. Peace to them he granted with heart sincere. They in return promised him gold, feigned themselves friends, while they together drank. But then came forth their guile. Then afterwards, on the second day, when they let me see the Old Norse, in Rígjardal rode, they with swords wounded him who sackless was, and let his life go forth. So this is a robbery. The part sackless is to be without provisions or backpack or any sort of wealth. So they got to know him, drank with him, made friends with him, found out perhaps where he was going, then rode after him, robbed him, and he really had nothing. His corpse they dragged on a lonely way and cut up piecemeal into a well, and would it hide, but the Holy Lord beheld from heaven. His soul summoned home the true God into his joy to come, but the evildoers will, I ween, late be from torments called. So the one that was robbed will be saved by the Christian God, because he beholds from heaven, which this isn't a concept that's foreign. I mean, we clearly speak of this with Lord Heimdallr and how he sees from heaven and has one foot in the middle world and one foot in the upper world, and that he takes note immediately. And that, of course, too, there are other machinations of the gods in order to collect the information flowing through the middle world. And ultimately, Lord Odin drinks from the well of memory, so everything that happens will flow there. But I think it's more interesting to say that the soul of the evildoers have an opportunity to save themselves, but the poet thinks most likely they won't. So that again brings in the whole of forgiveness, even for evil deeds. And you see this nowadays so often with parents who have their children slain, or you'll see it with, absolute just monstrous murderers, and then they spend some time in jail, or they're on death row, and they say, oh well, I'm forgiven, I've accepted the Rabbi Joshua into my heart, and I'm gonna make it. So you kind of already see that being, and then immediately it shifts over into this second part. It makes mention of the Disir, and I think that's really important, because the Disir, for a lot of folks coming into Asatru, when they come from a heavy sense of kind of worshiping and placating Yahweh, and loving, the human connection with Rabbi Joshua, they get like kind of the good feeling of relating to a human being that suffered, and at the same time they must placate the the mountain guy. The Deesir, I think, were one of those things that survived well into Christianity because of their connection to our ancestral lines. The idea of ancestral blood and spirits of our past, the assigned guardians of the bloodlines. I wonder, actually reading this makes me want to look up when exactly kind of the the Christian kind of refuting that, even gaining message or guidance from the dead was immediately demonized or condemned, because it doesn't seem to be the case initially during these conversion times.
I mean, it was condemned back in Jewish times, though. That was one of the things in
like necromancy.
Yeah, like the Witch of Endor, I think, did that in the Old Testament.
I wonder, was there a difference between receiving guidance from your ancestors versus, conjuring up to speak to the dead, like willful versus non-willful? I'm not saying I know. I'm just wondering if there's
biblically. I mean, there's like I forget what it's called. There's like the transmutation where it's like Jesus is talking to dead prophets or whatever in that one passage. Other than that, the idea of the overlay of like life after death isn't really a biblical thing. It's after the resurrection, then the resurrected people at that point get to exist, but there's like this stasis, and any kind of interaction with ancestors and any ancestral cult is super forbidden. And I think that's a common thing amongst any kind of indigenous religion, is that unbroken celebration and interaction and worship of ancestors and heroes. And that's part of the revolutionary aspect of Abrahamic religion, is the cutting off and the separation of that. Again, in Europe, we've overlaid pagan Asatru concepts over it, so you have this like the good dead people are in heaven and you can interact with them, the bad ones are in hell and you can't, or whatever. But it's not how it's laid out in the Bible.
Wait, what was the term that you said? There was something about buying a sword, and everybody thinks it's such a based quote, but it's talking about what you're talking about. The like, go not and buy a sword, and then it speaks about severing your ties with your father and your mother and your brothers.
I didn't, what's it? It said the Son of Man came to bring peace, but I say no, I came not to bring peace, but a sword to separate, and then a various like
familial
bunch of different family relations. I'm here to cut
they
you
never
off.
bring that part up.
And I think that's part of it. It's like you don't draw strength from the dead. You don't draw strength from, it's just you slog through, you give everything that you have completely prostrate to Jehovah, and then by that devotion, he'll like grant you cool stuff in the afterlife. But even that, the cool stuff's pretty lame. In Revelation, the cool stuff is you get the amazing afterlife of you get a crown, but then you're supposed to immediately give the crown back and put it at the feet of God. And I think you have a never-ending concert of singing about, like, you sing like Christian rock around the throne of Jehovah for eternity, and you're just like jamming out with like David Koresh and whoever else. You guys are just like rocking out there with Jesus songs for eternity.
Yeah.
I didn't make it up. That's not my thing.
Well, and I always find it very convenient that they don't add that last part in, you know. Or
yeah, the sword isn't like to slay evil or to slay your enemies. The sword is to like
the verses are in the chat.
Family members.
Oh,
they're in the private chat.
Aha. Okay, what is this so people can find it? I see the reference, but I don't see the book.
Matthew 10.
Matthew 10:34. Do not think that I came to bring peace on earth. I did not come to bring peace, but a sword. For I have come to set a man against his father, a daughter against her mother, and a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. And a man's enemies will be those of his own household. So
if you ever see those based internet crusaders throwing that around, tell them to finish the rest of the verse. Okay. So this part here again mentions the Disir. Do thou pray the Disir of the Lord's word to be kind to thee in spirit, for a week after all shall then go happily according to thy will. For a deed of ire that thou hast perpetrated, never atone with evil. The weeping thou shalt soothe with benefits. That is salutary to the soul. So a couple things with that one is perhaps the word disir is being implanted in, as Al-Siragodi said, there was a transference. The angels of Christianity really come from Greece, Rome, and Etruscan in their religious concepts of the prayers taking form and going to the gods as winged beings is consistent throughout all three of those. And so that became the very same thing in the mindset after Christianity, instead of I heard you you mentioned the monster manual and the beholders, which was, that's awesome, of these kind of ancient Abrahamic angels, and their hierarchy is insane. They perhaps are again linking the idea of these angels being more feminine. I think it's interesting because now I think a lot of Christians are making them androgynous, but it was clearly feminine, especially when you look at the artwork of early Christianity. The angels had a tendency to be women, except for key angels like Michael, or I believe it's Azazel or Ariel. I can't quite remember. There was one angel that is supposed to that early Christians prayed to, an angel of death. Again, emphasizing that I believe Christianity is a death cult, but that emphasizes it greatly. They used to have paintings and prayers to the angel of death to have a merciful death instead of, violent or tragic. So I wonder if that part is just being added, because he says Disir of the Lord. And another point here to consider in the Old Norse. It says, "Disir bid du their drotins." So, "Disir, do you bid or bid you from the war leader?" Drotin, Dryten in Anglo-Saxon is the war leader. The Lord kind of became synonymous with it, but the actual origin of the word, meaning like a general, or Lord Odin is referred to as the Dryten of the host, or the Dryten of the army. And so I thought that was very interesting. So this clearly seems to be an implant. And I think they're referring to angels. So do you pray to the angels of the Lord with words to be kind to thee in spirit? For a week after, all shall then go happily according to thy will. Because a deed of ire, of wrong that thou hast perpetrated, never atone with evil. The weeping thou shalt soothe, and that's not soothe as in like calm, but soothe as in like soothsaying or speaking the truth. So the weeping thou shalt say with benefits, that is salutary to the soul. So in this part, it's kind of like in the Runetal when he's saying, do you know how to sacrifice them? Do you know how to speak them? Do you know how to give to them? And speaking of the runes, in this case, it's kind of like, are you confessing your sins to the Disir of the Lord? Because if you do that, that will soothe. If you speak not soothe, but if you speak your prayers with sooth, then benefits will help your soul. 27, on God, no cap. A man shall have much riz. No, I'm sorry. Just every time I see it, it makes me think. And I like to throw that stuff in every now and then to make sure people are paying attention. 27, on God a man shall for good things call. On him who has mankind created, greatly sinful is every man who late finds the Father. So, again, the emphasis on sin, the idea that, this is another reason, going back to the Marcionites, if you get rid of the Old Testament, you lose the power of sin, not only the Messiah, but the sin factor that's created in the beginning when Yahweh bestows that sin upon Adamu and Eva. Once that's established, all mankind is bereft with sin, and they must atone. And the only way they can atone is through worship of Yahweh and then worship of the Messiah. And here, again, reiterating that everyone who comes to Yahweh late in life is full of sin, and they just need to get rid of it. I can, really kind of, it's dripping with that sense. I think ultimately because sin equates to guilt. The idea that you are guilty upon birth is one concept, but the other is that people feel guilt for doing things. Sometimes they feel guilt for doing things that really aren't that bad. It's finding that linchpin in order to alleviate. Oh, you feel bad about something? You feel bad for doing wrong? Or maybe you actually really did wrong? Either way, doesn't matter. If you do this, you'll be forgiven and you can feel better about yourself. So that's a great kind of tagline or selling point, if you will, because everyone has some sense or level of guilt about something, whether it's like perhaps they didn't do it quite the right way, or they did something that they perceived to be wrong but no one else did, or they actually did something wrong and brought dishonor or where it was unseemly. But that's okay. Whichever way it is, you just follow these simple steps and you're alleviated of that. 28. To be solicited, we opine, is with all earnestness for that which is lacking. Of all things may be destitute he who for nothing asks. Few heed the wants of the silent. This is again from the Halvamal. And in the Halvamal, the translation is more or less, I've never met a man so rich that he would not accept a gift, and I never met a man so poor that he would not ask for what he rightly deserved. So in this case here is, that, if you don't ask for things that you rightly deserve, you will never gain it. Few heed, the wants of the silent. And I wonder too if this is kind of pushing towards an idea that, if you fix yourself and are alleviated of all of these sins, then you should then cry out and make sure that other people are doing it, kind of spreading the philosophy.
I want to throw this out there too.
Yeah.
Just as kind of a random word of wisdom for everybody out there. You don't get what you don't ask for. Just to touch on the Halvamal wisdom of that. You don't get what you don't ask for. You lose every game you don't play. I think that's one of the things that I would. Okay, so this is a thing that was asked last program that I'm amending or looking back to. A question was asked about, man, do you have any regrets or what would you do differently? If I could go back and tell my younger self, just reinforce that. You miss all the shots you don't take and you don't get what you don't ask for. I think that a lot of our people would be very well served to try more stuff before they convince themselves in their own intellectualism that it's unlikely to help. And so they don't try to do anything. There's a lot of people bemoaning their lack of a girlfriend while they sit on grandma's couch and play video games all day. Hot chicks are not walking through grandma's basement, and if they are, they're probably related to you and probably aren't someone you should pursue. So that said, you got to be out there, you got to be in the game, you got to be making those efforts to get those achievements. And it's one of the interesting things that still shines through, the idea of you got to be an active participant. So you miss all the shots you don't take. Do while you have the opportunity to do. And it's funny, the juxtaposition, because in the true Christian sense, no, you shouldn't do anything and you should sit around and wait. And then eventually in heaven or after the resurrection or whatever, then you'll get you'll line up in the bread line. You'll get whatever you're portioning out of Karmasar Jesus's like portion he has for you? That seems random, but it just kind of struck me specifically because of that question last week. Carry on.
Well, and
actually, while we're in a point of divergence here, we have some questions stacking up. Let's get to them because we're reading a lot of Jesus stuff tonight, so it's cool to like break things up. The narrative is not as compelling as the little nuggets. So to go back to kind of the top of some stuff,
I was going to use the restroom real quick while you start addressing the
okay, cool
questions.
So while Svan is on a potty break, the Winter Ghost asks, greetings to both of you. Asatru is an Aryan folk religion. What books or videos are recommended to learn about better about Aryan/Hyperboreans, like the origins, Pan-Aryan differences? Thanks in advance. I will try to figure out a better answer than this because there's one that strikes me, and I can't think of the name of it right now, that's kind of a more scholarly work on it, but it's very hard to come by. There is a book, and you have to not care about this guy's politics that come into the introduction, but a book called Deep Ancestors. And I call the book The Wheel and the Donkey because there's like a wheel on the cover of it and like an ancestor of the modern horse, but it looks like a wheel and a donkey and it entertains me. So that's what it's titled in my head. It's called Deep Ancestors. The guy's name, I don't think it's his real name, but his nom de plume is, it's like an Anglo-Saxon name. I could think of it. Nick could probably, there we go. Look at him on cue. I didn't get it out of my mouth before he had it on screen. So his name, and my pronunciation is not right. Anyways, Ceisiwr, first name, last name, Serith. But the book is a really good book. I really enjoyed it. I got a lot out of it. I think that it's ground that's been trod a number of different ways by different folks. And if I can think of or find the bit more scholarly treatment of it that I had that I want to really look into, I will tell you that. So the subtext is Deep Ancestors Practicing the Religion of the Proto-Indo-Europeans. Anyways, I think it is good. I think it has a lot of value. I really got a lot out of it when I read it. The guy's politics are odd. Now so get it out of your head, stupid racist people. Indo-Europeans, that's not a race. That's a language. But it's a really specific language of a really specific group of people in a really specific area that are all related to each other. But that's not a race. There's a lot of nonsense in the introduction, but the rest of the book is really good. I would advise anybody to read it. It's not a hard read. It's not huge. Svan is muted.
Oh, I was going to say he, completely ignoring that they made caste systems to separate themselves from the people they conquered. But, he paints it as like they're just traveling along and picking up new people.
They're not racially aware. They just only mate with people that look like them, that have common ancestors, that they know homeboys, second cousins. But that doesn't count. Do you have any suggestions on things that folks might read that talk a little bit more about the ancient Aryans/Hyperboreans and the origins of or Pan-Aryan differences? And before I stop, the other thing that I think is useful, but this one is a hard read, it's a slog and it repeats itself, but Arctic Homeland in the Vedas by Bal Tilak is a good book. It talks about this subject in a good way from an Indian perspective, because you can do that a little bit more freely in that context. And he points out all the things in the very ancient Indian texts that point to a Hyperborean Arctic homeland for being the source of that root culture. And that's really interesting. And I think there's a lot to be gotten out of it, but it is not the greatest read, not the easiest read. I'm going to assume it was originally in Sanskrit or something else, and maybe that's translation. I don't know if that's the case, but it's worth doing. And I would suggest those two. Svan, do you have any additional ones?
Yeah, I was just double checking to make sure that because the author, the Scythians, Nomad Warriors of the Steppe, was a pretty interesting book by Barry Cunliffe or Cunliffe. And I think it's interesting to look at the Scythians. One, the reason why it was drawn to my attention was actually because of a Christian identity guy trying to say that the true Christians were driven into Scythia, and that that there were Aryan tribes in the Middle East, but they were eventually chased out by Semitic peoples, and they ran into Scythia, which started me down a rabbit hole of studying what little knowledge we have about their religious practices. And that was a really interesting book. The other one, and I'm double checking on that one as well, is see what's coming up here.
While you're looking, I'll just say Arctic Home and Vedas was written originally in English. It was just written in 1903 by an Indian speaking English.
Sorry, Ball, I tried.
The thing is I think this is the wrong author, which means it's the wrong book. But The Serpent and the Eagle, is that, or am I saying this wrong? I read it a while back.
Repeat.
And I know that.
Talking about
Which one? The what?
Repeat what you called it.
The Serpent and the Eagle.
Yeah, I'll find it. I will say one just because somebody on Twitter just posted it. The Horse, the Wheel, and the Language: How Bronze Age Riders from the Eurasian Steppes Shaped the Modern World is the driest, most. You'll read 1,000 pages on differences in pottery, but it has so many tidbits in it that's amazing. About the horse, the wheel, and language, and how they came over.
Yeah, I'm trying. Yeah, because there's one book about the Mexican Revolution.
Serpent and Eagle. Witan Young. They just did a book study on this like 2 months ago.
Yeah, is it a study of the migration period by Whitcower?
They did a book study at their house in Carolina, November.
Yeah, the eagle or I think it's just Eagle and Serpent, not the Eagle. A study on migration period symbols. Because I saw today too, somebody had posted like something about how, I think it's really great that our ancestors really focused in on this bird or, one specific bird. And they were referring to the raven. And I was like, what about the eagle? I mean, especially in context with the Gutans.
Are we talking The Serpent and the Eagle, an introduction to the Elder Runic tradition by Chris Travers?
No. I believe it's the migration period study of symbols, pre-Christian symbols. But it speaks of the time in which like the Gothic Empire was starting or Gothic tribe was building up, and their usage of symbols in relation, to their connectivities with the gods and with each other. And I find that super interesting because like pre-migration or migration period and pre-migration period is a very interesting time to look at Asatru, which I believe it was 100%. But it was in a different age. Again, speaking of the gods and worshiping the gods in like a lot of folks just, I don't know, they focus on maybe a fantastical or completely fabricated version of Norse life, and they think shoulder pelts and black face paint and all of this kind of crazy stuff that they see. And then they get into Asatru and they feel like that's what they want to, replay all of that. But not understanding that Asatru is far longer in our history and that each age has its own unique way. And I mean, it was really fabricated for entertainment value, but that our ancestors, traversed through different burial practices, starting with burying, then going to burning, then going back to burying, and then doing both. And also how we saw the gods and which ways that we kind of produced their imagery through animal or through human or even through just sacred places. And as we move into this modern day, they don't see themselves as being a part of the age that is now. The escapism to go back and the excuse to just be able to swill mead and grow a mohawk mullet or something, I don't know, is overriding the true fact that our ancestors believed and were willing to die for the gods. I think is lost on a lot of folks. So, but you can see it like repeatedly through these ages, even before the Viking age.
All right, so our next thing is from Sarah, and she says, "Good evening, Sólarljóð and Witan Svan. January 18th is the day of remembrance for King Bloatswain. How do you each plan to honor him?" It's a good question. This is his first day of remembrance. So, I mean, I'd like to certainly do something at my altar, but it's going to come on. I want to check to make sure I'm not wrong here. It's Saturday, so I will be at the Hof. I want to talk to folks about him at the Hof and celebrate him in Odin's Hof and speak his name there in a holy way. Mention him in our meal blessing there, and hopefully get some people that are not familiar with him to learn a bit more about him. So that's what I plan to do. Svan, what about you?
I generally always do the same formulaic way of maintaining obligation, in the sense that I am weighted with thousands and thousands of years of my ancestors. So like rekindling that is an obligation, and I do it in the same way. So I would, I'm doing it via Harrow. I will light a candle, I will ring a bell, I will blow the horn, and I will call out his name and then gift to him through the Hlaut Bowl, sacred mead, a gift from my side to his side, and then speak of his deeds. I think that it's really interesting, just his deeds. And like what I do, I guess, what does that mean if you physically see that, if you were standing in the room? I talk to him as a real person, and I say, like, I can't believe, you your brother had stones thrown at him by fellow Asatru at the time, and that you ended up taking power from him because you refused to let go of the ancient traditions of your people. And I think that that's amazing, and I want to have that conviction. So I verbally talk after giving gift, and seeing that the gift is kind of like an opening point to being able to express ideas or emotions or inclinations about what I've learned. And that generally I just say, for that, I thank you. And, I hope that many Asatru speak your name and give you gifts on this day. And then I, blow a single horn and I give the gift out. And so I try to do it very simply. And I've always come of the mindset that if you do things repetitively, it builds power. It's kind of like the next ring on a tree. And every time you do it, the tree gets bigger and bigger and stronger. So that's how I honor my ancestors, the gods, and heroes.
All right. Okay, so Heathen Man finished up Egil's Saga Part 4 the other night and had a question. Came to me during the poem of lament to his lost beloved son. He first curses Raun and then declares he'd kill Ayer if it was within his power to do so. He then ends by saying that it was Odin who broke troth with him. My question, I guess, is not about the specific instance, but more about general jurisdiction of the gods and the tangential powers around them. If one of the lesser powers decided they are taking down a ship, is it in the purview of Odin or another of the Aesir to stay them? Or of, for example, a man's devotee, Odin's man, a man is a devotee, Odin's man, but is a fisherman and knowingly pollutes or overfishes an area, and Njordr or Ayer decides specifically, I'm taking this guy down, would Odin be within his right to step in? I may be thinking too literal about it, but just a general thought on the jurisdiction of the gods and goddesses. If you could, thanks. Svan, what are your thoughts?
So one thing, I'm glad that you acknowledge that, like, perhaps you're thinking too literally about this, because it shows a sense of reflection. Again, me and Alcirago, they have heard people postulate very strange questions, but then the worst part is that they admit that they actually like fully believe it. The protein intake of Lord Thor or what have you, and it's wild. But what you're ultimately talking about is the regency of the Aesir and the gods, and I think it's always worth noting that from lore, and it's worth remembering that the gods are gods and they can do godly things. And I do not know the entirety and the scope of what those godly things are. But if we look at the lore and we look at kind of what the stories that have been passed down to us by our ancestors says, there is one thing that's worth noting is when the gods gather to meet out or to measure out the doom or the judgment of men, they gather in heaven at the third root of Yggdrasil, and there is a well there, and the Nornir are there. So time, the source of all time, is flowing out from there, and they are in essence enacting their will into the very fabric of existence. And I think that in essence they're all there, combined with this. So an understanding of what's happening is an understanding across the board. If Lord Odin wanted to step in for any reason, we've seen even bits of lore where that is spoken. But the view that I take personally of the gods is that through that well, this symbolic language of mythos is that they gather there to witness us as we live and to mete out judgments in certain ways. I do not think that they're directly responsible for perhaps, like just death in general, because all things must die. So it's coming eventually. But their interaction is kind of like them pressing their finger on the skein of the well. I mean, that's why our pouring mead into the bowl is so important. Or speaking over the horn and into the mead is that top surface of the liquid is this kind of transitional point. And by them making these ripples, they're in essence inserting their will upon the manifestation of time and fate. And they would see that and interact with that. Outside of them, I don't know. With Ayer is, of course, the Jotun of the primordial sea, and the gods go and connect with Ayer, in essence, placing their regency and dominion upon the most primordial thing that is on Ymir's body, which is the ocean. I think the animals reflect that with the animals that are even older than some trees on the surface. So they consistently go there and work that. But Ayer was not prayed to for benefit. He was prayed to for appeasement. And so I wonder, if that is to happen, perhaps they already see the outcome, or the folding layers of all threads meet. But I don't think that it is a matter of kind of a popularity or a voting. It's this culmination of action that the gods are involved in, to where as this giant rope of all things interacting is being wound, there are effects and what have you. And, the gods, I think, see the whole of that rope, whereas we are only thinking of these tiny, minute sections. And I think in that we get lost and think that the gods are going to just step in a regular sense. And I don't know if that's the case.
Yeah. So are you being too literal? Yes, I think so. But I think it's honest, and I think it's the kind of thing we all think about. And I'm glad that you mentioned it out loud. I don't think it works like that all the time. I suppose it could. First, it's not appropriate for me to suggest limitation of the powers of gods. If Njordur wanted to kill a dude that he thought was doing something worthy of him killing him, sure. If Odin wanted to stop him from doing that, sure. The gods are powerful, and they're relationship between one another and between mortals, facets of it are shown to us in lore and in our lives, but it's much more complex and a bigger deal than that. I mean, we see our gods taking sides in battles between mortals on really rare occasions, specifically in the Norse material. I think we see, Odin and Frigg doing that about the Longobardi. But that's not a common motif and a common thing, the idea that they are unified. And then also the idea that the other gods treat the All-Father with deference lends me to think that the Aesir specifically wouldn't, try to battle him on the fate of a mortal about whatever. But I don't think that's typically how things work. And I say that, I mean, we ask the protection of our gods when we go on journeys. We ask that. We do a wayfarer's bloat at events to ask that people return safe. We ask our gods for help in everyday life stuff a lot. How much a role that plays is up to them, certainly. I try to, praise it as just a personal little ritual thing I do when planes taking off on a trip. I hail each of the gods. I hope that they see me through safe to my destination, but less than that, I want, if something were not to go right, I'd like for within the last period of my life, for those to be some of the last things that I said and made a point of doing, was honoring them, as I'm about to go on a journey. So, in a similar way that if I'm going on a trip, I make sure to tell my wife and my daughter that I love them and stuff, because you never know what happens. I think the gods certainly favor people with blessings that they want to achieve things, or that it's beneficial to put some luck behind. But I don't think it's, I don't think they sit up there and just send out hits on certain people that get greenlit because they dumped toxic waste in the ocean. But I get it. We all have those thoughts and we all think those things. So I'm not trivializing the question. I think we've all thought those things. But I don't think it's quite that. I don't think it works quite that way. And I think one of the things about order versus chaos is I don't think that the Aesir get in petty squabbles amongst one another in that way. I think that when you're dealing with Aesir as opposed to Jotnar or something else, then there's more at play there. But a lot of that is impossible for us to meaningfully parse what's here or there on. But yeah, I know that's kind of a non-answer, but it's, I think, honestly probably the best that we have. Svan, would you take us? Oh, go ahead. After you're done.
I was just going to say, just to reemphasize again that it is said in Grimnismal and in the Volaspau and in the Gylfaginning that the gods gather to council, to meet in tribunal. They meet forth to give judgment to men in heaven. And it's very important because we don't believe that everything we're going to do is going to meet in a trial in the afterlife. And the gods are going to measure our heart with a feather, and our Filkia is like a lawyer who's trying to run defense. No, the gods are witnessing us now because the gods are involved in many things of the mortal and middle worlds, whether it's the natural forces, cosmic forces. They're at play with the entirety of all the movement, including, again, we asked for them to witness our lives. And when the gods do gather together every day, as the lore states, around the Well of Erd in heaven, they leave Ausgarth, the enclosed, capsulated castles of heaven, and they come down to where Yggdrasil stands in the center of heaven, and underneath it is a well, and they sit in their chairs and they mete out the doom. What does that translate to? To me is again, they move to the circulatory center of all things, and from here they can adjudicate into the world below through the well. And as they touch that skein of water, the ripples are made and the effects are held. And then we in turn are gifting to them so they can see us, witness us, and bear those deeds. We don't see them as being these afterlife adjudicators. They don't go down into the underworld where it's really hard to go according to the lore, because and Baldur is there, and Lord Odin sneaks past into these kind of places far away from order, and to have it stated that they just go down there and then they'll and that would foster a reality amongst the Asatru that you must build your case for the afterlife. Every deed you do good and every deed you do bad has to be measured up in that final case with your Filkia, that's got the cigarette and the loose tie and is trying to make it all work out and figure out how it's gonna, I got a tough defense here. No, we don't. I don't think that that's the way. The way is that the gods are witnessing us now, and when we do fall and our soul, goes to pieces, and the correct pieces fall into each other and move on to the next. Really, the true admittance into and over the bridge into the safe place that is on that other side, that safe haven where the souls reside, is the ancestors themselves. Because it's not specifically stated that hell has that admittance, but that Mavguth is standing there making sure you're either allowed to go to your ancestors or you must take the road that takes you to Gjol and Sleeve. I think it's also worth noting in Egil's saga, when he says that he has been, doomed, or that it was broken of him, the troth with Lord Odin, I think that this is a warrior's lament. See, and I think it goes that he is a warrior. He has been in every battle and never shied away from it. And he is not taken in battle so that he can grow older, have a wife, have children, and feel this great sorrow of losing his son. So the warrior lament of not being chosen in battle is one of the big points of Egil's saga. And I really identify with this. I went into war when I was in the Marine Corps with the express purpose of making myself available to be chosen. That was the entire mental weight of my time in Iraq. Was I never shied away from combat, always moved forward. And if I was to be chosen by Lord Odin, I would be chosen. And then on your way back, you're like, why wasn't I chosen? And again, the machinations of Lord Odin are bigger than perhaps the simple heavy metal wants and desires of young men. And I think that this is kind of lending to that the true point of it is that he was not chosen, and that he lived, and that he was feeling a sorrow that he would be never having to experience if he was simply chosen in battle. I think that's one of the big things about that stanza that really sticks out to me.
All right. Well, if you would take us back to our text.
Okay. Let's see, 29. Late I came, though called betimes, to the supreme judge's door. Thitherward I yearn, for it was promised me, he who craves it shall of the feast partake. Again, this is pretty straightforward Christian rhetoric that, I have come to want Jehovah or Yahweh's heavenly abode, and if I yearn for it, I was promised that I could partake in that feast. But again, the language is very interesting. They're clearly holding Nordic and Germanic concepts of hospitality and entering at the door and partaking in the feast. There is no Saint Simon, or as most people know him as Peter, waiting at pearly gates, etc. So it adapts in order to soak up the cultures it's in. 30. Sins are the cause that sorrowing we depart from this world. No one stands in dread if he does no evil. Good it is to be blameless. So again, that reemphasize of sin. This is a foreign concept to our ancestors, so it's being driven super hard. We have in our faith dishonor and unseemliness, which are kind of sometimes the same, but they're ultimately paradoxed, or not paradoxed. They're given framework in the context of an outer guard and an inner guard, and your kinsman and the frith that you make versus the stranger, the neutral, and the enemy or the ally that is in the outer guard. And that is the context in which you place your honor and your unseemliness. But here, it's not about what is good for the inner guard as being the ultimate good. Instead, it's every deed you're doing, the judge, because he says the judge's door. The judge is judging you for every deed, and every deed is based on what at this point? And that's where the entering of the Semitic or even the foreign Mediterranean mindset, or however it needs to be placed out there, is that this is how they start to inject the new moral framework. 31. Like unto wolves, all those seem who have a faithless mind. So he will prove who has to go through ways strewed with gleeds. That was an interesting translation there. Gladu or glidu and gleeds. I'm still I haven't had a chance to look that up. So clearly he's stating now, and this is kind of, again, context to our faith, the idea of the soul traversing between the land, the middle world, the land of the living, and the land of the dead is always seen as kind of a long path. The pathward is northward and downward. new shoes for the dead man so that he may travel well. This is all cultural language for that the land between the middle and the upper is the land between the lower and the middle and upper is a great distance, and it is difficult to traverse. It's not something that is just happens willy-nilly. And our souls must traverse that long journey. And death itself is kind of part of that. It's the breaking apart. It's very morose. It's very cold. It's very dark. And that's why everything about Hell's Road is in that context. The calamity of men and illness and anybody who's lost someone to the consumption of illness knows there is like this bitter kind of feeling towards that loss. That road is very toilsome. But here, he's also stating that, those who are faithless have to walk this road, and there are many who must walk it. And in 32, friendly counsels and wisely composed, 7 I have imparted to thee. Consider thou them well and forget them never. They are all useful to learn. So it almost feels like there was a poet who converted, or perhaps the child of a convert, who was keeping the poetic style alive and had learned the measure, but was creating kind of a shaky Havamali attempt, and it turned into this. It was just not very well ordered, very, very splotchy. Now, this could also be on the people recording it, Saimander, and the sources that he was getting could have been very choppy as well. But it's just one of those poems. And again, a lot of people might be thinking, like, what is the sun? It's the Sólarljóð. What does that have to do? It's actually mentioned later on, but briefly. And it's just awkward, but it's also kind of like, again, you're seeing these comparisons between the old belief and this new foreign belief. You're seeing direct interpolations from the Havamal, and ultimately at the end, though, it kind of falls short of, I guess what it's attempting to do, or perhaps this was like a kind of a practice poem for a post-conversion skald. 33, and then it shifts to it's chapter 3, 33. Of that I will speak now. Happy I was in the world, and secondly, how the sons of men reluctantly become corpses. Now, I think this is the death cult stuff shining through here. 34. Pleasure and pride deceive the sons of men, who after money crave. Shining riches at last become a sorrow. Many have riches driven to madness. 35. Steeped in joys I seemed to men, for little did I see before me. Our worldly sojourn has the Lord created in delights abounding. So, crave not money, crave not riches. The good Lord has created a world of abundance beyond money. I think, too, this might be also speaking to the time. The minting of money in the mainland of Europe drew a lot of attention from the Nords to come down and make, money and build power where they were at. And I think that's, a common thing for everyone all over. And I think that, again, the Nordic people knew that the world was full of bounty outside of gold. To coax it out of the land and out of the world in the north was not always an easy task. And that's not mentioned. Unless, I guess, you move to the Holy Land. But even then, you got your problems there. I think that our ancestors understood that. It's just, again, there's a call to dropping your money, letting go of your wealth, and, learning of the bounty of the world. And the best way to do that is to give your entirety over to Jehovah. I think that's a common theme that we see even to today. 36, bowed down I sat, long I tottered, of life was most desirous, but he prevailed who was all powerful. Onward are the ways of the doomed. So, again, doom in that sense is judgment. It's oftentimes used in the same way that the word like evil and ill is used, and it may have different context in our language now. But so ever onward are those to be judged, and it is better, to prostrate yourself, to bow down and give unto yourself in worship to Yahweh, because you will not escape the inevitable of death. 37, the cords of hell were tightly bound round my sides. I would rend them, but they were strong. 'Tis easy free to go. I alone knew how on all sides my pains increased. The maids of hell each eve with horror bade me to their home. The sun I saw, true star of day, sink in its roaring home, but hell's grated doors on the other side I heard heavily creaking. The sun I saw with blood-red beams beset, fast was I then from this world declining. Mightier she appeared in many ways than she was before. So in these last four, it's very interesting, but also worth noting the usage of the word hell and the concepts of the way our ancestors saw things. I've spoken about how our ancestors saw the gods as being atop Himmelbjörn and surrounded by clouds and light. They see the gods as not necessarily just simply floating above, but are kind of in this higher place of mountains, and that they were in the center of the world, but were above. And that, again, lends to the true thinking of where our ancestors were, is that the gods are in the center and above. How they conceptualize that, again, with the mountains and what have you. Other people think of Mount Olympus or what have you. But in this case, hell is always associated with death and the processes of death. So the binding of the ropes and cords of fate around the body, pulling one towards death. And that is, very Asatru in the sense of the poetics of it in relation to other references, is that, yes, death is that last and calling process that is, brought about by her, hell, and it's spelled this way with hell or heljar. So that means the actual being hell. The maidens of hell was an interesting point there, but I don't think there's much brought about that that I can think of outside of here. But again, her grated door is heavily creaking. It's opening up, and hell is calling. So I wonder too if this Christian was at a time where Christianity did not have the fire and brimstone afterlife, because they've changed their afterlife so many times. And so in this case, it's very much like if the Romans who were becoming Christians would simply associate Hades with that place. And that always happens because the initial view was how close you were to Yahweh. The farther away you were, bad. Closer to, good. And I mean, it even got to the point where the Jews had different last names, and that meant like it was like the equivalency of your row seating to Yahweh. Like the Levites were the closest, and then the Cohens were second, and so on and so forth. And that just transferred over when the Jews that were of the early Christian church started converting Greeks and Romans. They would do the same thing, but now it was God is not in Hades, but Hades is still kind of the same as the way they were taught. And so I think this is kind of very much the same case. The fire and brimstone stuff really did come a lot later. And the argument of whether or not hell was a different place, and which Satan was the Satan. Like there was a lot of different Hasatans. I think it was mentioned in the chat that like cleared it up for me that Azrael was the angel of death, but Azazel was a fallen Moloch. There's cases of them praying to both. Actually, I know that there was a tradition in which they would place their sins into a goat and place the goat out into the desert, and that the claiming of Azazel would absolve them of their sins that way. Huge, again, focusing on sins. So you can kind of see this part here. He's speaking much about the judgment of God. And you notice there's not a lot of Jesus talk. It's a lot of the judgment of God. But then when revert to hell and the dark and the underneath and the opposite, it immediately reverts back to what he would culturally know that predated the insert of Christianity. Bless you. Even referring to the sun as she, mightier she appeared. 41. The sun I saw, and it seemed to me as if I saw a glorious God. I bowed before her for the last time in the world of men. 42. The sun I saw, she beamed forth so that I seemed nothing to know, but Giol's streams roared from the other side, mingled much with blood. So I've spoken about it that when we die, the access to our ancestors comes first and foremost with the guardian of the bridge, who is Mavguth. And if we are denied access, then we must take the trail that leads us to Giol first, because there are two rivers that we cross over. And Giol means, it survives in our language with the word yelp. It means to cry out. So he's referencing lore of his cultural and familial and people's religion, while also speaking of this new religion that's coming in. And this is very specific. But Gil's streams roared from the other side, mingled much with blood. 43. The sun I saw with quivering eyes, appalled and shrieking from my heart in great measure, was dissolved in languor. 44. The sun I saw seldom sadder. I had then almost from the world declined. My tongue was as wood become, and all was cold within me. So now we start to shift towards an Asatru concept of death. In the difference is it's not about prostrating here for a better afterlife, but in this, I mean, and again, it's very, very clear where he's getting all of this is that life is good. The sun upon your skin, the wind, the ocean, the touch of a loved one, all of these things are great and powerful, and that death is about separating from a lot of the great gifts that we have here, that we enter into the realm beyond the veil. And there are, I believe, great pleasures there. And I mean that in not in any sort of degenerate sense, but like that there is that interconnectivity to be able to, speak and interconnect with our ancestors and to learn their side of things with no barriers between us, like in life and so on and so forth, and experience those great understanding and connectedness to them, and to again place our part of the story in it, and to be considered one of them, to not get barred, and to speak on behalf of the living, to speak about and hold counsel to and say and speak of who we were with, and where we went and what we experienced, and to tell the ancestors and to kind of stand as representatives from the middle world is really important. So we see this happening here. And again, the difference between now you'll hear Christians speak of like hellfire and brimstone and heat in this underworld sense, but he's talking about the stiffness of his tongue and the coldness, which is always why Helgard and Niflheim and death itself is observed as the stiffening, the cold, and the bleakness of separation from the joys and the treasure of living, that life is good, and that separating from it is sad. It should not be, I don't think it should be feared, but I think it's something that is worth missing. Otherwise it wouldn't be precious. So that emphasis of life, I think, is shining through. The sun I saw never after since that gloomy day, for the mountain waters closed over me, and I went called from torments. So the light and the living and the joys of life are swallowing him up in death. He becomes stiff, he becomes cold, and he traverses the long road, and he sees the river Gjöll, with much blood. And again, we've spoken about rivers and how they are the liminal spaces between the realms, and they border realms, they flow from realms. We have the 11 rivers that flow from heaven and border that land, and then there are the rivers here, and there are the rivers in the underworld, that again kind of create borders through these spaces. So once he passes through, he's saying, the joys of life are gone from me, and I'm inexorably crossing over. I no mention of Garm, which I interesting. No mention of Nipa's cave, or the cave dwelling, the hole in which is mentioned in the Volaspau and in the Gylfaginning as the place in which the dead must traverse. But all of that really is mythical or mythos language, symbolic of the arduous journey of death and the wake of which death leaves in the middle world. But to attain your ancestors at the end, to cross that bridge and to go beyond the veil and go beyond the hall of the calamity of man, the very thing that breaks everything down, and there to be in the halls where is bedecked, with gold. And that is where Lord Balder is, and Nanna, and Hodur, and all of the ancestors, and all of the barriers that kept us from understanding, or the things that we experienced dissolve away, and we become kind of connected in a way to better understand the life that we just lived. I think it's quite beautiful and poetic, but to get there, naturally seen as what it is. Terrible. 46. The star of hope, when I was born, fled from my breast away. High it flew and settled nowhere, so that it might find rest. 47. The longer than all was that one night, when stiff on my straw I lay. Then becomes manifest the divine word. Man is the same as earth. The creator God can it estimate and know. He who made heaven and earth, how forsaken many go hence, although from kindred aparted. So now this is kind of like I'm laying in my bed and I have this epiphany, and the epiphany says that this God is speaking the truth that man and earth are the same, and that many are forsaken in sin, and that each person is responsible for their own soul, despite the words and the deeds of their kinsmen, etc. Of his works each day has the reward. Happy is he who does good. Of my wealth bereft, to me was destined a bed strewed with sand. Again, another mark of don't build wealth because you can't take it with you. There's this kind of attack on that. Never mind like passing it down to your kinfolk and your children and etc. But as I'm reading this, the comment that you said, Alcirigo, that it is kind of like this, communistic way of thinking is kind of really hitting home right now, because they keep banging that drum. 50. Bodily desires men oftentimes seduce. Of them has many a one too much. Water of baths was of all things to me most loathsome. That's interesting. That shift between the desires of men oftentimes seduce. I don't know if this is like an allegoric to perhaps sharing the love of someone else who's been of the love of a lot of other people, or again, or something is shared. So he's comparing the seductions or the things that seduce men is like a bath that has been used by many people. So now we shift again, and here we see another gleaning sense of Asatru, where he says 51, in the Norn's seat 9 days I sat. Thence I was mounted on a horse. There the giantess's sun shone grimly through the dripping clouds of heaven. So the Norn seat or stool, Nornastoli, again, I don't think this is literal, but perhaps seeing from fate, or speaking of the stole that the gods sit upon to mete out judgment. That I mean, I don't know. I don't know where he is going with this, but it does again meet reference to, and another understanding of our cosmos is our ancestors did see the gods in that upper place in the mountains, and that the sun that went up and over was shared by the Vanir, was shared by the Aesir, was shared by the Jotuns, and that's why they have different names for the sun. Is again lending to that. So they did not see us as like being kind of this marshmallow in the middle of a tree, and that the gods are in the top of the tree and all of the wells are in the bottom of the tree. That doesn't really track a lot. So in 52, without and within, I seemed to traverse all the 7 netherworlds, up and down. I sought an easier way where I might have the readiest paths. Now, I think at this point, too, what most likely is being spoken of is the worlds in and of themselves, as we talk about the 9 worlds. But this would then include specifically the heavenly realm. It would exclude Leosalfheim, and it would exclude heaven via Ausgarður. So, but the rest of the worlds, he's traversing them. Unless there's, because there really isn't a mention of the realms below, specifically in the number 7. There's clearly Niederveller of the Svart Alvar, and there's Niflheim, and there's Helgard, but these are Helgard is an encapsulated place within Niflheim, just as Ausgarður is an encapsulated place within heaven. So again, 53, of that is to be told which I first saw when I too to the worlds of torment came. Scorched birds, which were souls, flew numerous as flies. From the west I saw Van's dragon fly, and Gleaval's paths obscure. Their wings they shook, wide around me seemed the earth and the heaven to burst. Now that is interesting, because the translation here too, Vaunar, Vanar, Vaunar instead of Van's dragons. It's like I can't recall anything of like connecting to this. And then here, the sun's heart, Hart, the deer, the sun's heart I saw from the south coming. He was by 2 together led. His feet stood on the earth, but his horns reached up to heaven. Now, fair to say, there is mention clearly of the 4 hearts that remain in heaven and are, standing on the boughs of Yggdrasil. So perhaps he's pulling poetic sense from there, or perhaps this is of another source, maybe a Christian source. I know of the heart with the cross that leads, I believe, a German saint. It's the emblem in the Jägermeister bottle has the deer head with the cross, and which perhaps pulling from that. I don't know. And this poem's like producing a lot more questions than I realized it was going to do, for myself anyways. From the north, I saw the sons of Nithi. They were 7 in all, from full horns, the pure mead they drank from the heavens God's well. And they used the title Baureans, the dwelling ruler. From his well, they drink the purest mead. And Nidhi, or Nidhya, is how it's said. I wonder if this is again referencing to the dwarves, and he's kind of saying that underneath, as he saw the dark, or the Svart elves, drinking mead directly from God's well. Because it points into burning birds and then drinking mead. The shift is very, very swift. The wind was silent, the water stopped their course, and then I heard a doleful sound. For their husbands' false-faced women ground earth for food. So he's saying and lending to the, I think the mark of, breaking oaths or what have you, that these women are grinding dirt like they would seed or wheat to eat. And that, again, clearly pulls from Nordic sources. Skirnir's Mall talks about how Skirnir says to Gerður that she will gain no sustenance from food, and everything she drinks will be of of foul things and of urine and what have you. Gory stones those dark women turned sorrowfully, bleeding hearts hung out of their breasts, faint with much affliction. Many a man I saw wounded go on these glebe-strewed paths. Their faces seemed to me all reddened with reeking blood. Many a man I saw to earth gone down, who holy service might not have. Heathen stars stood above their heads, painted with deadly character. So, very, very interesting in just the context in which this is being laid out. That these men are somehow marked by stars for their heathen worship. And again, I think this is kind of a rudimentary poetic style that would be spoken in a hall, and its intention is to stir up and pass the faith. But again, it's very disjointed, and that could be on the recording of it. I saw those men who much envy harbor at another's fortune. Bloody runes were on their breasts, graved painfully. I there saw men, many, not joyful. They were all wandering wild. This he earns, who by this world's vices is infatuated. So I think also, too, it's worth noting, just like Dante's Inferno, some of the punishments and the concepts in which are being discussed are unique to the time of the writing. And so it would be understood what the runes are, but the fact that they are written on the chest. So the influence of Christianity is really prevalent in this poem, but they're sprinkling in these other elements that the audience would know. I saw those men who had in various ways acquired others' property in the shoals. They went to Castle Covetous. Feyjarnsborgur is what the translation, or what the Old Norse says. And burthens bore of lead. I saw those men who many had of life and property bereft. Through the breast of those men passed strong venomous serpents. I saw those men who the holy days would not observe. Their hands were on hot stones, firmly nailed. So again, and I think there's the emphasis too on the difference of life of going out and going a Viking, and then post-Christianity, no, don't do that. You can't, fight, kill, and take other people's things. But again, that didn't necessarily even stop after Christianity. Especially in perhaps the names and purposes of what they were doing it, especially in the North. It took many, almost a century before that was kind of weeded down. And then it was more organized, at least, and sanctioned by the crown or the church. So, and wait a minute. One thing he said here. I need to go back. I wanted to see one thing though. Helgadaga, holy days. Halda Helgadaga. I just wanted to see which reference of holy they used. In 66, I saw those men who from pride valued themselves too highly. Their garments ludicrously were in fire enveloped. Since our ancestors held great pride in their vestments, they wanted to look, in their best clothing, in their brightest colors. I think ultimately all of this is lending to the stuff that our ancestors, speaking about the poet, held in high regard, their pridefulness, their wanting of money, and their willingness to fight needs to all be let go. And, people who liked it, this is what happened to them. People who did it, now they're, enveloped in fire. People who are greedy have their hands nailed to stones. And again, it just kind of lends to a theory of mine as well that the sadisticness of death worshippers have, in which they gleefully speak about all of these terrible things in just gruesome detail with a gleam in their eyes, but not for them, because they followed the plan and they know the rules and they're going to get past it. But they just kind of joyously talk about what everyone else is going to get. 67. I saw those men who had many false words of others uttered. Hell's ravens from their heads, their eyes were miserably tore. All the horrors thou wilt get to know which hell's inmates suffer. Pleasant sins end in painful penalties. Pains ever follow pleasure. I think that's pretty self-evident of a very Abrahamic concept of, denying yourself riches, denying yourself pride, denying yourself pleasures, that all of these things follow in numerous tortures. And again, this is the only time where hell and Helgard are seen in a more of a Christian context. I know that a lot of people try to afford that to Snorri, but this is clearly the Christianization. I saw those men who had much given for God's laws. Pure lights were above their heads, brightly burning. I saw those men who from exalted mind helped the poor to aid. Angels read holy books above their heads. So lastly, that's the other thing. Helgard is seen as the land of the dead. It's the place beyond the veil. And in this case, the torture of beings and the exaltation of beings and the rewards of beings are in the same place. Those who were much given to God's laws have pure lights above their head, but those who speak false have runes carved on their chest and heathen stars above their head, marking them for, being heathens. But it's all in the same place. I saw those men who with much fasting had their bodies wasted. God's angels bowed before them. That is the highest joy. I think that's an interesting one there too, because Yule was a time of feasting. And during that time, a lot of the Christians, which I actually don't believe they were celebrating the rabbi's birthday at that time, but that were instead fasting. But the adoption of feasting became a thing because they were losing so many people in conversion. But they constantly reemphasized the idea of fasting. And I don't think fasting is bad, nor do I think it's something that our ancestors pre-Christianity were unknown to. But the overemphasis of it with the intent of being awarded or being, anointed in some way by, denying yourself is again kind of like a combination of, like, I would say, like Zoroastrian magical practices that kind of inversed into Christianity, all the way to kind of the aesthetics of like the combination of Christianity and Mithra and the overall like kind of rejection of societies they were in. Feasting was such a big part in Greece. Feasting was such a big part in Rome, and everywhere they went, feasting was such a big thing. And so one of the stark convincing factors that they had to press was no, feasting is bad. And if you actually fast, you will be anointed. So while everyone else is having fun, don't eat and seethe that anger against your fellow kinsmen.
But especially once you get into out of the Mediterranean, why would you fast if you're hungry 3/4 of the time anyway? It does.
Right.
You're already looking for food most of the time.
Yeah, and feasting in the north was often at the giving of a lord or someone of high renown. You might be a fisherman and eat fish all year round, but then suddenly the great landowner, like a half day's ride away, is going to hold a bloat and have a feast. And this is the only time you might get a chance to get beef or cow and lamb. So, you show up and bloat is there and everyone's eating and having a good time. It might be the only time you get a chance to sip mead for the year. A lot of feasts, especially in the north, were actually predicated at the giving nature of someone or a group of someone's. So it gets, again, this back and forth and this painting of Christianity kind of layered in. I saw those men who had put food into their mother's mouth. Their couches were on the rays of heaven pleasantly placed. So those who fed their mothers were given exaltation. Again, this is one of those that, and we've seen this before earlier in the poem, I don't think there were like, it was heathen custom to let your mother starve. No, not at all. I think this is one of those clearly jointed points, but he's just trying to emphasize like returning love to the one who brought you into the world. But then it goes to holy virgins. There we go. Holy virgins had cleanly washed the souls from sin of, this is an interesting, I think it's a misspelling. I think it's the word is supposed to be tribesmen. because it's TFIBSE. I think they mixed it up, but yeah, it's the holy virgins had cleaned and washed the souls from sin of tribesmen who for a long time had themselves tormented. So those who have been tormented, those who have been tortured or perhaps imprisoned, their souls are set free. Again, kind of appealing to the slave class. Lofty cars I saw towards heaven going. They were on the way to God. Men guided them who had been murdered wholly without crime. So here in 74, looking to see Hauverreider Sau Himinium carts, or like, I would have to look that up. Because obviously the word cars is not the usage. But here they're saying too, like, oh, so now you're getting on the bus and you're going up to God, and the guys that lead you there are guys that were killed but never did anything wrong. Almighty Father, greatest Son, Holy Spirit of heaven, thee I pray, who hast us all created, free us from our miseries. And it switches to chapter 4. Buivor and Listvor sit at Herther's door on resounding seat. Iron gore falls from their nostrils, which kindles hate amongst men. Odin's wife rose in Earth's ship, eager after the pleasures. Her sails are reefed late, which on the ropes of desire are hung. So now we kind of start to see some kind of, blaspheming. And again, I'm trying to read into like what the Earth's ship might mean, other than, again, that she has dominion over the mundane or dominion over the earthly pleasures. 78, son, I, thy father, and Solkatla's son, have alone obtained for thee that horn of the heart, which from the grave mound bore wise Vidvalen. Here are runes which have engraven Njordr's daughters, 9, Radvar the eldest, and the youngest, Krepvor, and their 7 sisters. Now, I just want to take a slight moment to point out that I made mention a while back about the 9 daughters of Njordr versus the 9 daughters of Aegir, and how the 9-daughter proponent in relation to the lords of waters, whether it's the ocean or the rivers. And this is another mention of it. So just wanted to point that out. But this is the first time I've ever read this poem, and the names just of like, okay, for instance, the translation is Boldve, not Radvor. And so Boldve, I think, means like the lust of bidding, which, again, if it's a waterway, the idea of like a flowing river that pulls you in a direction would be a bidding, a lustful bidding. I would have to look up more on Krepvor, but I just think it's really interesting that the translation became Radvor. which is super odd. And you got to be careful with these translations sometimes like that. 80. How much violence have they perpetrated, Svalf and Svalfloi? Bloodshed they have excited, and wounds have they sucked after an evil custom. This lay which I have taught thee, thou shalt before the living sing the sun songs, which will appear in many parts, no fiction. Here we part, but again shall meet on the day of men's rejoicing. O Lord, unto the dead grant peace, and to the living comfort. 83. Wondrous lore has in dream to thee been sung, but thou hast seen the truth. No man has been so wise created that has before heard the sun song. So this is where the name comes from, but it also re-emphasizes a couple of other things that even in the onset of the Asatru Folk Assembly, and it clearly rings through my head when I think of Founder McNallen speaking about how there is this understanding that we shall not, in Asatru, the gods do not alleviate us from pain, and oftentimes we don't ask for it. Again, this goes back to the comment that was, mentioned about Egil and his saga, and the understanding that we are synchronizing with the gods, but synchronizing with the gods does not mean that we are immune to the inevitabilities, the calamities, the flowing of fate, or their judgments. They all have a play in this flow. And here we see, in death, grant peace, and to the living comfort. I don't think that is the desired purpose of our faith, is to, be alleviated of pain, but to experience life and, again, experience the best of life. I'm not saying that we're out looking for, to be flogged or take the sins upon us or what have you. No, instead, what we see is that the world is a gift. The light is the gift. And but we're not absolved from, the moment you step out of your door, you are subject to the twistings of fate. And all of those things, whether it's the gods playing their hand in the ripple, or the actions of your neighbors, or the action of some person in the outer guard way far away, all of these things are rippling and rolling together, and we have to weather them with strength in our faith and with the strength of our kinsmen and our family. But we're not alleviated from it.
No, I think this is a meaningful concept in contrast. One of the hallmarks of what it means to be Aryan is noble. The faith of our ancestors is about winning. It's about being heroic. It's about achievement. You can't have any of those things without struggle. It's not a celebration of hardship that you're overcoming, but without struggle, you can't achieve and you can't accomplish. It is literally the exact opposite of the Christian mindset of being saved by faith and not works. Yes, our gods want your loyalty. That's what Asatru means. But there's not a concept of salvation, and you are not elevated because you believe in things. You are elevated because of your actions, because of what you do. You are literally our equivalent of saved. You are acknowledged and celebrated because of works. There is a in slave religions, in religions of just mass poverty and suffering, the desire, and this is where we run into the difference between the Eastern expression of ancient Aryan things and the Western expression. And I think it gets muddy when we get around the turn of the 20th century and mid 20th century, when so many people didn't have a wide familiarity with Asatru, but there was a celebration of, Eastern mysteries and of Hindu thought. You get a strange mishmash of this. Their great hope, if they do everything right in the East, is often expressed, especially in the Buddhist understanding, but in different schools of Hinduism as well, is a dissolution into nothingness. Basically, it's putting you out of your misery. The whole world is illusion. The whole world is miserable. You want to get off that wheel and out of the elusive, the illusionary misery that is life, and become one with nothingness. That is anathema to our folk and our values. We don't. We embrace new and better challenges beyond the veil. We want to continue ascension in a heroic fashion, and one of the highest expressions of that is the warriors that feast at the All-Father's table, sent out to do battle, on the cosmic plane. The embracing of heroism, of struggle, and of accomplishment sets us apart and is one of the really beautiful standout aspects of our faith. And sometimes you learn through studying bits of lore. You learn from the things presented in a positive way, but you also learn from the things presented in a contrasting way. You learn when things are in line with our values, but you also learn when you see glaring foreign things that aren't good. You learn by that absence what is good in contrast. So this is a really interesting one. It's one that I don't think people spend a lot of time on. I think many people don't even know about. And I think it's kind of a cool thing. Thank you guys for joining us this evening for tonight's discussion. It's always great to have you guys. I appreciate the generosity of our audience. We had a number of people donate this evening. Thank you guys for that. And waves come and go as far as participation in the chat room, but people are viewing it live and consuming it. If you think of questions later or whenever you think of them, please remember vns@runestone.org, and we'll make sure to answer any of those questions the next time we are on. Coming up next week is a special edition of Victory Never Sleeps. I have Adulting with Alan. Our law speaker is going to get on here and talk about financial success, financial health, financial fitness. Our people get inspired by our lore, inspired by heroism and stories of daring do, but it's hard sometimes for people to put our values in play in their own life and their day-to-day situations and find victories and successes in the life that's in front of them, as opposed to in a idealized past. One of those things, our people need to get better about taking care of our finances, taking care of the financial health of ourselves and our families. And the law speaker has some thoughts on that he would like to share with all of us next week. So I'll be joined by Alan a week from today, and we'll look forward to talking to you guys about that. Do keep in mind, if you can make it out to White Springs for Charming of the Plow at Njordshof, I would love to see you guys there. And if you can, or if you can't, I'd love to see you a month later at Thorshof to celebrate Ostara. So please make it to one or both of those, and I'd love to see you if I can. If not, I'd love to meet you whenever I get the opportunity. Thank you guys for being an amazing audience. Swan, thank you always for sharing your insight with us. Nick, thank you for your contributions, your like quick draw whenever I need links and quotes and stuff. You literally caught me mid-sentence, I think a couple of times tonight. So we appreciate you guys.
I saw you struggle, and I figure I'd help you out.
I appreciate that. I'm glad you got my back. All right, guys. Well, until then, hail the Aesir, hail the folk, hail the AFA, and remember, victory never sleeps.
Good night, everybody.